Hey everyone, it's Justin again. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the coordinate notation used to describe translations. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to use coordinate notation to describe translations. Remember coordinate notation from a few lessons ago? If not, you should pause here to go back in your notes and refresh your memory. In this lesson, we're going to start by learning how to write coordinate notation for the two examples from our previous lesson. Then, we'll complete two additional examples similar to what you'll see in your practice. This is the first example that we looked at in the previous lesson. Do you remember this problem? If not, pause the video now and go back in your notes to review what we did here. In this lesson, we want to write a notation that describes what happened to our points when we translated or shifted them. Let's see if we can find any patterns when going from our pre-image coordinates to our image coordinates. We want to pay specific attention to how the x values and y values change from A to A prime. So what change do you see in the coordinates when we go from A to A prime? Remember to think of adding and subtracting, since this is a translation. Now, check if that same change happens in all the rest of these. Hopefully, you figured out that 2 was subtracted from all the x values, and 4 was subtracted from all the y values. Let's write the coordinate notation for this. We know that we started with an x value and a y value for each of the points in our pre-image. So, once again, we write that as x comma y in parentheses. Then, we draw an arrow to write what happened to x and y. So what happened to all the x values when going from our pre-image to our image? 2 was subtracted from all of them. We show that by just writing x minus 2. Then, we're going to find a way to write what changes happened to our y values. We know that 4 was subtracted from all the y values to go from the pre-image to the image, so we write that as y minus 4. Now we have our answer. This is the coordinate notation to describe a translation 2 units to the left and 4 units down. Here's our second example from the previous lesson. Now our goal is to write a notation that describes what happened when this pre-image was translated. Pause the video so you could do this problem on your own. Let's see how you did. We have to find the pattern that takes us from the pre-image coordinates to the image coordinates. So what change do you see in the coordinates when we go from C to C prime? Now verify that the same change happens in all the rest of these. The pattern is that 7 was added to all the x values and 1 was added to all the y values. Now we can write the coordinate notation for this. We always start by writing x and y in parentheses and an arrow. Now we write what happened to x and y. Since 7 was added to each x value to go from the pre-image to the image, we show that by writing x plus 7. And since 1 was added to all the y values on the pre-image to get the image, we write that as y plus 1. And now we have our answer. This is the coordinate notation to describe a translation 7 units to the right and 1 unit up. Now that we've gone back to the examples from our previous lesson and written the notation, let's take a look at 2 more examples that'll be very similar to what you'll see in your practice problems. Here's the first problem. Given the pre-image, G, and the coordinate notation of the transformation, write the coordinates of the image, G prime. What type of transformation is occurring? Pause the video now and think through this one on your own. Okay, our coordinate notation tells us that 5 must be subtracted from the x value. Since 2 minus 5 is negative 3, we write negative 3 as the x value of the image. Then we go back to our notation and see that 7 is added to the y value. Our original y value is negative 1, and when we add 7, we get a new y value of 6. We can even make a sketch if we want to see how this looks. Then we can describe in words what happened here. We can say that this transformation was a translation 5 units to the left and 7 units up. And now we have both parts of our answer. Here's the last problem for us to try together. It says, given the image J prime and the coordinate notation of the transformation, write the coordinates of the pre-image, J. To find the pre-image, we're going to have to work backwards. Pause the video and see what you can come up with. Our coordinate notation tells us that x minus 3.5 is equal to -1. We can write that as an equation and solve for x by adding 3.5 to both sides. We place the value we found for x in the beginning of our pre-image coordinate. We can also see that y plus 1.5 is equal to 5.5. We can solve this by subtracting 1.5 on each side of the equation, and we get 4 as the y value in our pre-image. Setting up equations and solving can help us work backwards to find that pre-image. That's it for this lesson. Now you can use coordinate notation to describe translations. See you next time.